Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian Podcast. This is Dean Jones, the Well-Seasoned Librarian. This is Season 4 and Episode 13. Today I'm honored to have a very multifaceted author, writer, podcaster, hotel owner, Jamie Schler, who has written, among other things, the book Orange Appleal, Savory and Sweet, and also the book that's available online on Apple Books called Isolation Baking, which is available to get there. She's got a food blog called Life's a Feast, and she's a wonderful writer, and I really love her work. I've read her work and been following her for quite some time, so I was very honored to be able to have her as a guest on the podcast. She also has a brand new podcast called Stir Crazy, which is quite nice. It's on Amazon and iTunes, as among other things. I listen to it on Spotify, so I'm sure you should be able to find it on any platform. So without further ado, we're going to go to talk to our guest, Jamie Schler. And here we go. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian Podcast. Today, I am very honored to have on my program Jamie Schler from Life's a Feast. Jamie, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored and I'm really excited to be here.
Now, I know that we had put this in for later, but you have your own podcast coming up yourself, and I'm kind of eager to talk to you about this and listen to it myself. Tell us about your brand new podcast called Stir Crazy.
Well, it's something that actually, we can tell by the name Stir Crazy, it came out of confinement. Just everybody spending so much time on social media and spending more time listening to podcasts because we had the time. And it actually came up kind of strangely, and it came up because of Twitter. A friend of mine who was starting a new podcast decided to do a little promo on Twitter. And by just putting up a tweet saying, if you could start a podcast today, what would your concept be? And I thought, what the heck? I answered him and I said, my concept would be a food podcast, but my guests would not be food professionals. They would be just, people from all different professions, none of them food. And we would talk food because I think that especially with people, the contact I've had with a lot of people I've been meeting and following on social media during confinement, I've been surprised at how many people that you couldn't imagine that they stayed home and baked cakes or cooked were actually really passionate cooks and bakers. And I know from experience that people who are not in the food profession, they're not food artisans or chefs or cookbook authors or food writers, of which I know gazillion, they have a lot of fascinating food-related stories, excuse me, and a great insight that's different than food professionals have on food and family, food and culture. So I thought it would be fun to get some of them on a podcast and talk about food.
I like that. I love that. And I love a lot of food podcasts. I never get tired of listening to them. I think my wife's even said, how many podcasts do you listen to on food? I'm like, how many do you got? I'm enjoying this. This seems to be a wonderful heyday, almost kind of like a renaissance of food writers getting to talk together. I really like this.
Yeah. So I think it's been fun doing it with non-food professionals because I don't know how many podcasts exist where the guests are not in any way, shape, or form food professionals. So it's been fun. We've taped 4 so far, and I'm prepping for my next few guests, and it's fun. It's kind of scary, but it's fun.
Now, Jamie, for our guests who are not familiar with your work, can you tell our guests a little bit about yourself?
Very briefly, I am an American. I grew up in Florida, went to school in Philadelphia, worked a little bit in New York, and then left for Europe in 1985, actually, and settled here in 87. And I've lived in France with little side 7 years in Italy since 1987. And I've done a few different professions. I was a professional milliner. I was in culinary tourism. And my husband and I bought a hotel in Chinon, Hotel Diderot,
Hmm.
in Chinon, which is in the center of France. We moved in and took over in January 2015.
Now
And
you've
I'm also, gosh, yes, I'm also a freelance food writer and cookbook author. Can't
right.
forget that.
No. I you've been in France for quite a while. What's that been like for you? I mean, you probably feel like a citizen of France now. I mean, how does that like for you?
I don't feel French, but I don't, I mean, I go back to the States and I feel foreign there. I feel foreign here, which is kind of, there's a lot of advantages to that, but it's home to me here. I feel kind of, like I said, I feel kind of foreign in the United States now. I'm much more used to European lifestyle and culture, even though we've lived in a couple of different cultures within Europe. But yeah, so this is, and it won't be our last. I mean, we're talking about our next move in a few years when can retire, sort of retire. And if we want to stay in France or go to another country. So
No.
yeah, we're
Um,
free and mobile. I mean, it's like, life is, we have nothing that tethers us to any place. So we can pick up and move whenever we want, which is nice.
Yeah, I like that. Now you worked as a translator in Paris at a professional cooking school as one of your first jobs there. Can you
Mhm.
tell us about that and how wonderful that must have been for you?
Well, I actually started working for a gentleman called Robert Noah, who had created Paris en Cuisine, which was probably one of the very first culinary tourism organizations. I mean, he was probably one of the first people to do high-end culinary tourism. And so I worked with him doing as guide and interpreter. So we would take groups of 1, 2, 3, maximum 6 people to Michelin-starred restaurants, into the kitchens, and have private cooking demonstrations. I would take them to, the best wine cellar in Paris for wine tastings or champagne tastings. I would take them to visit a lot of the artisan producers in Paris. And he also had created 4 years earlier the Anglophone section at the big French professional cooking school in Paris, Grégoire Ferrandi, which is, the American program is still running. I mean, I started working for him he started in the mid 80s, and it still exists. So it's for Anglophones who want to come and acquire the French cooking diploma, the CAP. And so when I started working for him, he sent me there to take over. He was doing the interpreting for the Anglophone group. And mostly I did 6 hours of pastry for their pastry class every Monday for 4 years. And then I did all the extra classes, the sausage making, the fish and seafood, the bakery, things like that. And it was, first of all, it was a lot of fun. And it was also fascinating getting to see not only the cooking school, but in the kitchens of Michelin-starred restaurants and how they worked, and get to meet the chefs. But what really made me the food writer I am today, many years later, is that I had to know absolutely everything I could possibly know about French cooking from cooking techniques to dishes to the chefs and the restaurants, everything that was going on in French cooking then contemporarily, but also the history of French food, and just absolutely everything, because I had to be able to ask questions and answer questions and translate. So that's when I just became fascinated with the history of French cooking. Not only the history of French cooking, but the social history and the social evolution of dishes and food and cuisine, and literary mentions of food and stuff. So it was really intense, and it was really fascinating.
Now, Did you always want to go to France? Was that something you'd always like wanted? Was that always a goal for you? Or was it just a happy accident that got you to France?
No, it was neither one nor the other. I was living in New York. I mean, it was kind of leaving the States more than it was going anywhere else. I was very unhappy in the job that I had and kind of the choices I made for for my career and politics and the whole social, everything going on in the States during the 80s. And
Yeah.
one day I said, that's it, I'm leaving. And I literally dumped all of my belongings on the sidewalk in front of my apartment building, except for 2 suitcases and a few things that I gave to my brother to hold on to me for, and quit my job and broke my lease and thought, well, I guess I'm going to France because I studied French in high school. So that's it. And so I went but for the next couple of years, I was back and forth. So I would run out of money. I'd be able to afford a one-way ticket back to the States. I'd go back to the States. I would temp for a couple of months to earn the money to go back to Paris, and I was back and forth. And then in 1987, I met someone who I married and became a resident.
Nice. Now, I think a lot of Americans have misconceptions about France and French food. What are some of the things that you discovered when you first moved there? And did you have any misconceptions yourself when you moved there? And what did you learn about France as you came to live there and become somebody who lived there long term?
Oh, that's complicated. Let me think. I don't even know if I had any misconceptions. I think because I came to France, I came so quickly and precipitously that I didn't even think twice. But I remember when I first arrived in Paris, I was standing on a street corner with a map, and a French woman came up to me and said, "Do you need help?" And I said, "I'm lost." And she actually walked me to where I needed to go. So any I mean, back then people were, the French are rude, the French are whatever. Um, I mean, I had people say, "Do the French have washing machines?" So there were a lot of crazy misconceptions, but I think it was all kind of broken. I mean, I saw from the beginning that it was just, another place like any other place that I'd ever been, probably.
Yeah.
Um, what's more interesting is the misconceptions I had, and what I think a lot of Americans have about French food was that I always thought, maybe it's different now because of social media and more chefs are traveling around the world and working in different places. So, um, but I think as far as French food goes, I think I had the misconception, and a lot of people have the misconception, that it's fancy, that it's not really accessible, that it's expensive, that it's complicated to make. And what I realized over the years, especially because I married into a very, very working class family, and when I saw the food that they were preparing, and then the people that we got to be that I was friends with, the food they prepared, I realized that it wasn't. And through my studies, what I realized is that French cuisine, and I don't know if it's one of the few cuisines that developed this way, but from the beginning of time, French cuisine developed in 2 parallel paths, one for royal, aristocratic, noble kitchens, and
Yeah.
one for peasants. And it very, very, very rarely crossed over. And so what you see today is, and all that noble, aristocratic French royal cooking became restaurant cooking, because all the chefs after the French Revolution opened up restaurants. And it's still pretty much that way today. So you get, this kind of now more elaborated, but this peasant cooking in people's homes. And in the restaurants and in pastry shops and in, fancy food shops, you'll get the other kind of cooking with the sauces and the spices and the fancy cuts of meat and whatever. So this was kind of fascinating for me. It still is.
I want to ask you, I looked at your bio and I saw that you lived in the Italian city of Milan for a while, which is, everybody knows is the fashion district of the world. What was that like to live there?
Well, that is where I trained to be a milliner.
Nice.
Because we moved there with my husband's job, and hesitating, should we do it, should we not? And I was like, yes, absolutely. We want to go and try and live in Italy for a while. And when I got there, I had just worked, for 4 years as this culinary interpreter in culinary tourism. And I couldn't do that in Italy. So I decided to train as a milliner. And, but I loved Milan. I loved Milan. I loved eating in Italy. I loved cooking in Italy. I loved living in Italy. I got along with Italians probably better than I get along with French. I understood them. I understand them better. But cooking there was just, you go to the markets and everything is local. Everything is seasonal. So one day you'll walk into the market and you'll see piles and piles of every variety of tomato you can possibly imagine. And then one day you walk in and they're gone. Same with what do you call them now? I can only think of it in Italian. Artichokes.
Oh, yeah,
Same
yeah.
thing. Yeah, you go to the market one day and all of a sudden there's, like 5 varieties of artichokes and mountains of them, and you cook them and you cook them and you cook them. And then one day you go back and they're gone because it's no longer the season. So it was great. It was just
How did you
great.
how did you come to cooking? Did you always like cooking, like since you were young, or did you start cooking when you were older, like an adult? Like, how did that come to you?
I always liked eating, and I know that nobody ever says that. They always say, well, my mom was a great cook, or my mom was a bad cook, or
Yeah.
I loved eating and I lived to eat. My mother, when I was very young, I know she told me that when I was very small, she kept bringing me to the doctor because it was a problem, because all I wanted to do was eat. And I was fascinated with, flavors and textures, and what if you put this with this and how will it taste? But my mother hated to cook. She was not a good cook. She hated to cook. So from very young, we had to prepare our own breakfasts and our own lunches. And then little by little, as we got older, we would also be responsible for our own dinners once a week, and then twice a week, and 3 times a week. So us kids kind of banded together, but we didn't cook. I personally didn't cook to, oh, let me see what I can cook. It was more like, what do I want to eat? But on the other hand, my dad was a baker. My dad was an incredibly passionate baker, and that really influenced me, because I just could stand there and watch him bake forever. I never baked with him. He never asked me to bake with him, but I just watched, and and then I didn't start cooking or baking until I was really out of college, and I was on my own. And then for a long time, I was too poor to do anything more than basic stuff. But when I worked in New York, I worked for a couple of art dealers, and one of them wrote a small cookbook with a friend of hers, and she had me develop and test some recipes for it. And that was really the first chance I had to do that. And I started to understand how that worked.
That must have been really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I just basically didn't start cooking a lot. I also lived down upstairs from my brother in Brooklyn for a while before I moved to the States. And he's a fantastic cook, a really, really, really fantastic cook. And I learned a lot from him. And baking too. He did both. And then I married a man who cooked for his family when he was in grade school. I mean, his parents, they owned a corner shop, And they had the apartment upstairs, and his mother would say, okay, do this. And they would do it. And so she had the kids cook when she couldn't. And little by little, my husband ended up he had 3 sisters, and none of them were interested in doing it. So he took over doing it. And then he just said, well, I'm going to get a cookbook and just start doing stuff my parents don't usually do. So I've learned to cook. I'm a baker. Cooking, my husband does the cooking, and what I didn't learn from my brother, I learned from my husband. So I'm much more comfortable baking than I am cooking.
Now, in 2008, you began your food blog, Life's a Feast. Can you tell us how you were inspired to do this and what it has been like for you since you started it?
Well, that's another kind of off-kilter kind of thing, because I was working as a milliner, and I had created a hat label with someone I met in Nantes, and it lasted for 2 years, and then I couldn't work with her anymore. So I stopped hat making, and my sons needed a presence at home at that time. They were kind of wild high school kids. And so I stayed home. And so I started to cook and bake all the time, more and more and more and more, because that's what I love to do when I was home all the time. And after about a year of that, my husband and my older son came to me and said, you're starting a food blog because we're sick of hearing you talk about food all the time. And you need an outlet to channel all of that obsession. So they created the food blog for me. I didn't really know much about food blogs at all. And so I said, okay. And so I did. And the first few blog posts, I can't even remember if I put up recipes or not, but I basically told the story of this is why I am, writing this blog. And
Right.
And that's when I realized that I liked talking, but I liked writing about food even more than I liked making it. And I love telling the stories around the food. And I have to say that we raised multicultural sons. So my sons are, I'm American, I'm Jewish, their father's French and Catholic. They spent 7 years in Italy, raised as in Italian, immersed in the Italian culture. And also my husband had lived and worked for a while in Morocco before I met him, and he learned to cook when he was there. So my sons have all of these different cultures, and because my husband is a great cook and I'm a cook and baker, we've always used food to, whenever we've cooked and baked for them, it's been very, a lot of traditional stuff. We do a lot of research, and we do a lot of traditional things from each of these different cultures. And we used it to kind of teach our sons about their different heritages, their different cultures that make up who they are. And we use them as, kind of a vehicle to tell stories to them about their Italian life, or, Jewish customs or Catholic holidays or whatever. And so this was a great resource for me for my food blog, and later for my food writing as well.
Now, I want to, kind of mention your blog to the listeners, because if they've not read it, it's not, I don't want to diminish it and make them think it's just like recipes. There's a lot of you in there. There's a lot of your life in there, and there's a lot of travel and like cultural stuff in there from where you live. Was that your intent when you started it, or did that just develop organically?
Well, there's two things, because my original blog that I started in 2008 is no longer public.
Right.
I closed it off to the public in 2015 when we moved into the hotel, and I recreated it in order to be able to tell stories about the hotel. And then with all of my work in the hotel, I kind of fizzled out. There's not, I haven't posted for a while on it, and I wasn't posting as much as on my old blog. My old blog I posted pretty regularly, but So already that's a little bit of a change, but I think the only thing that really changed over time is that I focused a lot on the writing. And at some point I understood that I could actually control my writing. I taught myself how to write. Basically, I taught myself that I could edit myself, and just have more control over what I want. I could play with the language as well, which I like doing. um, some of my stuff is more, it's kind of musical if you read it out loud. At least to me it is. And working, it was kind of my private space. So when I started writing for other platforms, I I replaced a little bit of the personal part with more factual details, like more history of food and stuff. So I could write in two separate, what I could write a little bit differently for publications as I did for myself. So I basically wrote for myself. And then on my new blog, you'll see that I did insert some completely non-food, more observational, because we lived in Nantes for a while. And yeah, those were old blog posts I transferred to the new blog, where I was writing about, I would take pictures a lot with my phone. And so I would do series on my blog of photos of chairs. And then I would write thoughts about that. Or I did photos of graffiti and write thoughts about that. So I think my blog became a place for me to experiment with my writing, even though it was usually around food. And then I just added recipes.
Now, can you tell our listeners about your hotel and how long you've had it?
Yes, we moved in January 2015, and it's a 27-room hotel. We have a
Wow.
staff of, we have a staff of 5, and it's in a beautiful 15th century building, which was originally built as a home for a canon of the church, because Chinon was since the year 100 was a thriving religious community. And later, a few centuries later, it became a royal city as well, because we have the royal fortress where French kings lived and English kings lived. It's a fascinating town for being a very small town. And that's really it. I also make all the jams. When we bought the hotel,
Oh, nice.
I had to agree, we're the 4th owners of the hotel, and each of the former owners made all the jams, starting with Madame Linel, the first owner in the 60s. They always made the jams that were served at breakfasts here. And when we wanted to sign to buy the hotel, they said, you have to carry on the tradition. And I said, okay. So I learned how to make jam. And I make, I don't know, 1,000 jars of jam a year for the hotel.
That's quite a bit.
It's a lot. It's a lot. But that's when I listen to podcasts.
Yeah,
when
I can imagine.
Stirring jam.
It must be really exciting to run a hotel. I mean, you must meet all kinds of people. It must be kind of thrilling, I imagine.
It runs the whole gamut of emotions, really, because it's an incredible amount of work. It's exhausting. Luckily, I love our team, our staff. We're like a family. It's great working together. But it's been fascinating on a lot of levels. Yeah, I've met a lot of people. Some of our clients we've actually become friends with, and I keep in touch with. We have a lot of returning clients as well. And I've seen some amazing stories happen here. I've met some fascinating people. We've had some famous people here. And I've also learned, you observe, because I serve breakfast every single morning. And you start to see a lot of cultural differences between people. You know, the Spaniards are like this, the Italians are like this, the Americans like this, the British are like this. And I kind of find that fascinating because it's, you know, it's true. I mean, even when it comes to just what they, you know, how they behave at the breakfast table, it's very cultural.
Yeah, I've noticed when I've been abroad, I've noticed that too, and I've also, had different friends. There were different cultures, and it's funny the American take on breakfast versus other people's. It's very kind of fascinating to see the diversity there.
Hmm.
Now, since you've been food writing, has this changed your cooking at all? Has it informed your cooking, or and vice versa? Has your cooking that you've been doing informed your food writing? Has this evolved for you?
I'm I'm sure it has. Hmm, that's a complicated question. Um, I I think when you know that you might be either posting something on your blog or you're doing a recipe. If I'm doing a recipe that I might want to, because it's something very traditional from a certain area, for example, and I might want to pitch it to a magazine, I pay much more attention to how I'm doing it, um, because you want to get it right. You want to get it perfect.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, my cooking itself evolved after spending those 4 years as an interpreter in a cooking school, because I learned, you know, the gestures and how to chop something and how to whip something and how to, you know, all those little things, those little gestures, um, and I learned to, from the very beginning, to pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And but hmm, I mean, I think I try certain recipes because I'm interested in learning about that particular recipe, because I hope maybe to write about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, I want to ask you about Food Blogger Connect. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Food Blogger Connect this was back in what, 2010 or 11. There were a bunch of us who lived in around Europe, in Italy, in Great Britain, in France, in Germany, who had gotten to be friends through food blogging community. And, you know, we were going to food blogging conferences uh, in the States. It was really the only place that there were no food blogging conferences in Europe at that time. And we were so tired of, you know, spending a ton of money on an airplane ticket and flying to the States and just to go to conferences, that we decided to create our own. And so there were about, I can't remember, about 6 of us, I guess, who got together and who created Food Blogger Connect in London, which was the first English language food blogging conference in Europe. And we actually had Americans who came and Canadians who came, which was fun. We had people from all over the world actually who came. And after doing that for 2 or 3 years, a couple of us, there were 2 writers and 2 photographers, we decided that there were so many, we're starting to meet people who had done the round of food conferences. They'd gone to all the food conferences in the United States 2 times, 3 times. They've come to ours twice. And we realized that people were looking for the next step, which would be an actual hands-on workshop. And so 4 of us got together and created what was probably the first hands-on food writing, food photography workshop ever. And we did that in Europe, obviously. And that circulated around the 4 countries, because one lived in Germany, one lived in England, I lived in France, and one lived in Italy. So we kind of circulated them. Oh, we did one in Ireland. Yeah. And
Oh, that must have been amazing.
yeah, and they were really, really great. We did them with 12 people max, and just did an intensive 3 or 4 day workshop where they did photography and writing separately, but then together. How when you're working on, for example, a magazine article with a photographer and you're the writer, or vice versa, how do you mesh those together? How do you use them to complement each other? How do they work together? So it was great. And I started doing them here at the hotel with either only one photographer or one fellow food writer. I like doing it with another food writer too, just the 2 of us doing it, because you get 2 completely different points of view and experiences with the same craft, which is food writing.
Now I want to ask you also similarly about your plate to page workshops. What were
Right,
those?
that was the workshop. That
Okay,
was
that
the
was the same
workshop that
thing.
we came out of. Yeah, that came out of Food Blogger Connect. Yeah, we created plate to page workshop. Yeah.
So you wrote also for the Huffington Post. How did that come
Mhm.
about? That must have been very exciting.
That was in 2010, and I had been food blogging for 2 years, a little less. And that was when Ariana Huffington still owned and ran Huffington Post. And someone contacted me and said, I love your writing. I love your food blog. Um, Huffington Post is creating a food page. Would you be interested in being a contributor? And I said, yes. You don't say no to that.
No.
Especially me, who had only had no other professional writing experience. And so it was fantastic because I could write whatever I wanted. And at that point, there was an editor of the page, and he really worked with us. He didn't really edit our stuff, but he would help us. He would help us promote it. He would help us place it and stuff. So that's the same thing. I mean, it was 2010, and I go back and I look at my writing, and I realize that if I wrote the same piece now, I would completely, I'm a much better writer now than I was back then. But what was great about it was that it gave me a lot of freedom, because I could post what I wanted when I wanted. And that's when I really started writing about topics that I did not write about on my own blog, because they weren't personal enough. I could write pieces that were less personal and more, I guess, journalistic, if you want to call it that. So I loved the experience. And I did that for 2 years until I think at some point she must have sold Huffington Post. They completely changed everything, and
Right.
there was no longer a specific editor. He disappeared, and it was impossible. It just became a less fun, less agreeable experience.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of faded out over time. I tried to add, like, once every year, I would add a list of like cookbook recommendations for the holidays, for holiday gifts, which I like doing. And that was it. But it was a
Now,
great experience. Yeah.
I imagine you've seen, because you've been writing since, would it be fair to say you've been writing since like 2008 professionally? You've seen like a lot. I mean, with the HuffPost thing coming and going, and just since 2008, I feel like there's been a lot of differences in food writing. There's been a huge kind of a revolution. Do you think right now we're kind of hitting like a renaissance period where all kinds of people are doing it, everybody's really enjoying it? Even television is caught on, and they're getting food writers to have TV shows and stuff. You think we're
Mhm.
hitting like a renaissance right now?
Oh gosh, since COVID, the last couple of years, I've kind of been out of it and not really been involved at all or followed what was going on. I think, I don't want to get myself in trouble.
Yeah, no, that's a tricky
Because
question. Sorry.
Well, because I know that food blogging, there was a big change in food blogging when people started to realize they could make a lot of money with food blogging, and it became professional.
Right.
So instead of people like me and all those people that I had originally were food blogging, doing it to be creative, doing it to be fun, um, that whole, it kind of, for me, it tilted it out of balance when people started to become food bloggers because they realized that they could become professional at it. Food writing was sort of the same, where there are a lot of great people, a lot of really talented people doing a lot of great food writing. I think the different, I don't know, yeah, I don't want to, I don't know if I need to share my opinion. But I have been trying to get back into it. I started recently a collaboration with a food magazine in the States, and I don't want to say anything who it is because my first pieces are coming out next year. And I'm starting to refine my passion for research and developing recipes for publication. And so I'm going to start to, now it's time for me to come out of my COVID, the COVID isolation, and start to see who's doing what again.
Now, in California, we're coming upon orange season here, and I'm really excited by that because I love the variety and bounty of oranges we have here, and that speaks to your cookbook, Orange Appeal, Savory and Sweet. So how did you come to write this, and what was your inspiration to write this cookbook?
I actually signed with my agent in Martha Hopkins after I purchased the hotel, because I want to write and I've started to write a memoir about owning this hotel and running the hotel. And so I knew I needed an agent, and she wanted me, so we signed, even though it was still far off on the horizon, because I don't want to write the book until after we eventually sell the hotel. And so we just decided to try and throw out an idea in order to get my name on bookshelves. And to tell you the truth, I can't remember how. I think I came on oranges because when I started to look for a topic, I didn't want to do French cuisine because there were so many people doing it, for good, for better, for worse, because there are a lot of people who shouldn't be writing about French cuisine who are, but there are a lot of good cookbooks by Americans on French cooking. But I didn't see myself trying to work my way into that crowd of authors. And at that time, citrus was getting to be really trendy. And in looking at all the books that were coming out on citrus, I realized that nobody had done a book specifically about oranges. And I think oranges are incredibly versatile. And in my opinion, the most versatile of the citrus fruits. And so I started to explore it, and I thought it would be fun. And yes, I grew up in Florida. I grew up on the Space Coast of Florida, which is Indian River citrus, which is world famous. I even buy Indian River citrus in Europe.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, I grew up with citrus. We ate it all winter. It was a winter fruit. And I mean, we'd go directly to the groves and either pick them when we could or just buy them at the groves. And although I never cooked or baked with them, I just ate them. I grew up eating citrus. And so I put together a proposal, and I had, some publishers interested in publishing it. And I decided to go with Gibbs Smith, and voila. And what was great about this book was that though I had never baked with orange except for, putting zest in things, I had a lot of fun developing the recipes, but the savory part, the savory recipes just kind of blew my mind. I worked with about 15 recipe developers who followed me through the whole project, because there were a lot of people who volunteered to work with me to test recipes. And we were really just blown away by the orange, using orange in savory recipes. And I think those are just the recipes that people love the most, because they're the most surprising.
One thing I really like about the cookbook the most is that you don't just have orange recipes. You show us how to cook with orange, which I think is such a big distinction, because a lot of us, I think we look at cookbooks, it's like just a handful of like baking recipes usually. And people don't always think of meat, but I really love the applications where you use it with beef, use it with pork, chicken, fowl. I think that like it's ingenious to see somebody kind of holding our hand through this and saying, look, because I mean, just the things like the orange sugar and the orange salt, I know I'm doing that like forever now because it's freaking brilliant. Why I didn't think of it before, I don't know. I've always had oranges, I've always had salt. I never thought of making it myself. And it's just a genius idea that I think anybody who gets this book's going to be like, that's going to be a game changer for them. Because the thought of like making a pork shoulder with like a mixture of the orange salt and the orange sugar, kind of curing it before cooking, I think is just going to be amazing. And just pairing it with all these things, I'm really looking forward to getting. I think my family's going to be like, why are we having so many oranges suddenly? I'm like, just go with this, you'll see.
Well, the thing that surprised me the most was I really wanted to develop a couple of vegetarian recipes. And so I developed this quiche that has, I mean, I just threw so many things in there. I made this savory sweet quiche, and I used orange in the crust. I used it in the batter, and which is an egg batter. And then I added orange chunks with, I think I put dates and hazelnuts in it, but I also put spinach and feta for
This just sounds
salty,
brilliant. All that sounds brilliant.
and zucchini. And it was, I mean, I served it, and it was incredible. And the focaccia too, a focaccia where again, I put orange in the focaccia dough. There's probably zest and juice. And then on the top, I put onion, green olives, and orange slices. And I think those are just two of my favorite recipes, just because they're just, I mean, I just started to add everything I cooked. I just started to add orange juice, orange zest, and my staff who tested the recipes boldly, they were very courageous because they think I'm crazy anyway. Them, my husband, and my son, who was here for a while, would start to get, is there orange in this? Are you sure you put enough orange in this? Are you sure you're feeding us more orange? But they all loved everything, so I was very pleased.
Yeah, I can't see anybody turning any of this down. I think, who's not going to love this? This is all good stuff.
It was fun to do. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do. It's fun to explore something like that, saying, okay, you have one ingredient. Now you have to do 70 recipes using it. So it just ends up being a lot of fun.
The production value and the food photography were gorgeous in this. Did you have any hand in like directing that, or did the publisher kind of hand it with you?
Well, my photographer is Ilva Beretta. Ilva and I have worked together. We did actually plate to page workshops. That's where we got to know each other. She was one of the photographers. Then we broke off and we created a blog called Plated Stories together. And we did it for 2 years, and we won an IACP award for it. I did the writing, she did the photography. And she's done the photography for me for a couple of pieces that I've written that were published for publication. So we've worked together a lot. So when I got this deal, I told my agent to see if she could get Ilva on as the photographer. And so she did. And so Ilva, I had just complete faith in her styling and photography skills. And basically, we did not work together. I sent her recipes. She had, a certain number she had to do for the book. under contract, and she chose which recipes to shoot. She made them, and she styled them and shot them. So it worked. And then the layout of the book, which is fantastic, is somebody who works freelance, I guess, but does a lot of good Smith books. Yeah, they did a really great job. Yeah,
it's a beautiful book. Now, tell us about your newest cookbook, Isolation Baking. Now, I can guess the title, but tell us a little bit about it.
Well, when last March, when we in France learned that we were going into complete confinement, isolation, lockdown, I know that there were other places like New York. There were a lot of places in the States that were already in lockdown and confinement. A lot of other countries in Europe were going in at the same time. And schools were closing, so people were isolated at home with their kids and were hoarding, going to the supermarket and hoarding.
Yes.
Flour, yeast, things, things so they could cook and bake. And I figured, okay, people are either going to need to learn how to cook and bake, or they're going to need inspiration for new recipes because they're going to be at home for who knows how long. And they're also going to want stuff to do with their kids, and baking is a great thing to do with kids.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'm going to start posting recipes on Twitter. And so I did a first recipe thread. And then the following day, I put a second recipe thread up. And I said, I hashtagged it Isolation Baking. And I said, if you do the recipe, please take a photo of it and share it with me on Twitter. And I was shocked at how many people did. And people I didn't even expect, people who, like famous people who don't even follow me on Twitter were like sending me DMs saying, I made your recipe, it's fantastic.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
And then I started to post more. And what was not only were people sharing photos of them and doing the recipes, but they were getting to know each other because they would comment on each other's photos. And then people started to thank me for distracting them between politics and COVID. I mean, Twitter was just, like the apocalyptic dystopian, whatever. People were coming on and, doom scrolling. So they were so happy that there was this recipe coming up and they could do something and do it with other people because everybody was doing it. Oh, I like to think everybody was doing it. And I started posting 1 to 2 recipes every day in that first 3 months that we were in confinement. And after a couple of months, people started saying, oh, I'm having trouble. I'm not having an easy time following a Twitter thread. Or other people are saying, how do I go back and find recipes that you've already posted? And so people started asking me if I would put them together in one place where they could access them all easily. And so I figured, well, I'll reactivate Life's a Feast, my blog, which I hadn't posted for a while. And I tell you, I went back to post a recipe on Life's a Feast, and it had been so long since I had posted anything on my blog. The whole platform had been updated and changed, and I had no idea how to post anything anymore. I mean, I did, but it was just so time consuming and difficult. I thought this is never going to work. And my husband, who spent 15, 20 years in publishing and has been asking me for years to work together so he could publish an ebook. I told him what the problem was, and he said, let's do an ebook. And so we found a platform, and he helped me with all the technical side of it and all the layout side. And so I just started posting recipes and collecting them into this ebook. And at that time, we had, several months had passed, and we were still in, we had no income at the hotel at all, zero.
Right.
And we had a feeling that this might go on for a long time.
Yeah.
And we were trying to brainstorm ways to bring in a little income. So we thought, well, we'll sell the ebook for, $5, $10. But it became really, really complicated because of the whole this is in France, but I'm in America and kind of
Right.
thing. So we decided to just give it away for free. And I did ask people if they wanted to donate to the hotel. I opened up a PayPal account they could donate. And people actually did very generously. And that went into helping save our hotel the first few months, because at that time, there was no solidarity aid or anything coming in.
Right.
And so I just kept the ebook out there, and every now and then I reshared on the link on Twitter. It's on Apple Books. And for people who don't have an Apple product like Mac or iPad or iPhone, I created a Google Doc with the PDF. And it has, I think, 90 recipes. I think I ended up on Twitter posting about 150 recipes, and 90 of them are in the book.
Yeah, I've seen you on Twitter. I think that's where some of the first places I became familiar, and then I ordered your books and stuff, your book. And so you really do great on social media, and I've seen such loving responses to your posts about the books. It was really kind of really inspiring to see. Now, tell me about who are some of your food heroes, or some of the food writers that you really enjoy reading their work?
Oh, food writers. I should have looked at. I have a whole bookshelf of food memoirs and food writers. I tell you, two of my heroes are Anna Thomas, and who wrote Vegetarian Epicure 1 and 2, plus a few others, and Molly Katzen, who wrote the Moosewood cookbooks, who since I've gotten to be very good friends with her too.
She's amazing.
But these two women, their cookbooks came out when I was maybe a little bit before, when I was in college. I discovered them in college, and I know that neither of them were professional food writers or cookbook authors. They were, I think Molly was an artist, and Anna Thomas is a filmmaker, and they wrote these cookbooks to raise money for their creative passions, their creative work. But to me, they created a revolution. I mean, they did something to vegetarian cooking that made it, fabulous. I mean, because before that, vegetarian, and I've been going through my vegetarian stage in college and stuff, and it was all that, a lot of dried beans and, nut balls and things like that. And all of a sudden here they were doing these creating fantastic food that was vegetarian. And it really created a whole revolution, and turned so many people on to vegetarian cooking. And I just think that's what they did was just amazing. And as women, as a young woman, I saw this happening too. So I mean, they just became heroes of mine.
I think we can't underscore enough Molly's contribution to cooking and food writing. I mean, I worked in a bookstores for several years, and Molly's books would just fly off the shelf. I mean, she was such a big seller, and people were so happy to get her books, because she was like a lifeboat for people that were cooking largely vegetarian food, who actually wanted to cook something good. And I think she changed the face of food writing quite a bit. I mean, she's just amazing.
Yeah. And Vegetarian Epicure 1 and Epicure 2 were my first two cookbooks, the first two cookbooks I owned. They were both gifts. One was a gift from my brother, and one was a going away gift when I transferred schools from an old college roommate. And I still use them. They're falling apart. The spines are all broken. The pages are falling out. But those two are my most used cookbooks, and I'm still using them.
Yeah, I always say there's cookbooks you keep in your kitchen and cookbooks you keep in your library.
Yeah.
And hers are definitely ones you keep in your kitchen.
Yep.
Now,
Yeah.
if there was no quarantine currently and you can go anywhere in the world and eat, what restaurant would you go to, or restaurants, if you want to mention a few?
I was thinking about this, and I'm not sure that restaurants, I would go to a particular restaurant. There are cities that I would love to go and discover. My younger son lived in Munich for a few years, and kept inviting me to come visit him, and I never did. And now I regret it, since he doesn't live in Munich anymore. But he would just tell me about the restaurants, and and weirdly enough, I would see shows on French TV about the food scene in Munich, and I would love to go there and discover it and eat there. And
That'd
of
be
course,
nice.
places like, I'd like to go back to Rome and eat.
Oh, yeah, my God, yeah.
Yeah, and I loved eating in Italy. Gosh, yeah. As
Yeah, I've been
far as
talking.
restaurants, yeah, I don't know. There's a few restaurants. I mean, I'd like to go back to. There's a restaurant in Nantes called Lulu Rouget that I wrote about, actually. A young chef. He opened up when we lived there, and 2 years ago he got his first Michelin star. And I've been meaning to go back and eat there. That's a goal.
Mm, that sounds
Yeah.
wonderful. Now, do you have any advice that you could give to people that are starting out in food writing?
No. No, I say no because it's like I said, I've been out of it for a couple of years, and I feel like 2 years is centuries. I, I mean, I think the best advice is to read. It's always the
Yes,
best advice, is to
absolutely.
read, and to read not just one author or not just one magazine, but to read everything that you possibly can. And this is what I tell people in my writing workshops, my food writing workshops, is to read a lot of food memoirs, but also a lot of books, just a lot of different authors, and contemporary stuff from the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, a lot of different stuff, until you understand what it is you want to write about, and what your angle is, and what really is passionate to you. Um, I mean, for example, I kind of stand out. I didn't have a ton of stuff published, but people knew who I was because I had a very particular angle, which was, I wrote, as an American, about French cooking, French cuisine, but I did a lot of the history behind particular dishes and foods. I wrote about the home culture of cooking and eating as well, because I've spent so many years, embedded in French people's homes and in a French family, understanding the rituals and how people cook and how people eat. And so, I mean, I think that's the best thing to do, is to read as much as you can and just try and understand, not only work on your writing skills, but try and understand what it is you have to say that's unique.
Yeah, I
And
like
then
that.
get to know people, connect with people.
Yeah,
That's the best thing too. Yeah.
I totally agree. Now, as
Yeah.
the last question, the holidays are coming up, and we have, of course, American Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Christmas, all kinds of holidays are coming up. Are you cooking anything looking forward to cooking anything for the holidays?
I've been working on trying to get both of my sons and my one son with his family here all at the same time. So if they come, then we will cook. Now we have certain traditions, because I love to bake, that we don't celebrate Christmas, we don't celebrate a lot of those holidays, but every year I make a bûche de Noël. Every year for
Oh,
Epiphany, I make a galette des rois. So there's food traditions that I make every year because we love the food tradition, and not necessarily because we celebrate the holiday. So I will probably, but I am working on a collection of French traditional Christmas recipes for a magazine piece. So I am still testing the recipes. So the next month there will be a lot of that happening. in my kitchen. Even if there's no meal to go with it, we'll just be eating a lot of French pastry, holiday pastries.
Doesn't sound so bad.
Cake for dinner.
Yeah.
Believe me, it won't be the first time my family's come home and found cake for dinner.
I don't think anybody's going to complain. Jamie, it's been wonderful talking to you. I really appreciated getting to have you on the show. And I want to recommend anybody to check out your cookbook, Orange Appleal. And now that orange season's coming up, it's a wonderful cookbook. Also, isolation baking. Definitely want to recommend that to people. And also the coming up Stir Crazy. I want to have everybody come and listen to your podcast. I can't wait to listen to it myself. I'll be a regular listener. So I look forward to that.
Right.
Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
That was my interview with author and now podcaster Jamie Schler. I encourage you to follow her bio that I posted here and look up her website, her free cookbook, her blog, and also her podcast. All the information is on the bio on any of the platforms that this podcast is on. Coming up on Friday, we have Mario Lopez Goyocochea. He is a friend of mine and somebody I really enjoy getting a chance to talk to face-to-face. He and I have been contacting each other about writing for months now, and I really feel like I've known him for a long time. Wonderful man. Really enjoyed to get a chance to get to talk to him. He's a great friend, and I hope you all get a chance to stop in on Friday and listen to his interview then. Until then, hope you all have a great week and happy cooking.